Anaxagoras. Science started in the shadow of prison bars. Anaxagoras, who was born on the western shore of Asia Minor about the year 500 before the present era, taught the moon has light which is not its own, but comes from the sun. From this it followed the sun is eclipsed at the new moon through the interposition of the moon. He was the first to set out distinctly the facts about the eclipses and illuminations, wrote Hippolytus, the father of the Church, in his refutation of all heresies. In the first century of the present era, Plutarch gave this account. Anaxagoras was the first to put in writing, most clearly and most courageously of all men, the explanation of the moon's illumination and darkness. His account was not common property, but was still a secret, current among only a few, for in those days they refused to tolerate the physicists and stargazers, as they were called, who presumed to fritter away the deity into unreasoning causes, blind forces, and necessary properties. Thus Protagoras was exiled, and Anaxagoras was imprisoned and with difficulty saved by Pericles. Anaxagoras was accused of impiety and sentenced for holding that the sun is a red-hot stone and the moon is of earthly nature. This was in disagreement with the view that these luminaries were deities. He taught the sun, the moon, and all the stars are stones of fire, which are carried round by the revolution of the ether. Anaxagoras was put in prison and was marked for death, but Pericles barely succeeded to release him from the death house and set him free. According to another account, he was fined the heavy fine of 5 talents of silver and banished. Possibly the fine and expatriation were imposed upon him in lieu of capital punishment by Pericles' endeavor. According to Theophrastus, Anaxagoras held that the moon was sometimes eclipsed by the interposition of other bodies besides the earth, traveling below the moon. Modern science does not know of such occultations of the moon, and therefore denies such an explanation. Only large swarms of meteorites or comets, if interspersed between the earth and moon, could cause the phenomenon. Anaxagoras taught also that the terrestrial axis changed its direction in the past, but if to give credence to Hippolytus, he taught that the earth is flat in form. However, he believed that there are many earths like ours. According to a fragment of his, men were formed and other animals which have life. The men, too, have inhabited cities and cultivated fields as we do. They have also a sun and a moon and the rest of the stars, as we have, and their earth produces for them many things of various kinds. In this there was already an initial departure from the belief in the uniqueness of the earth and its central position in the universe. Hippolytus.
Refutatio omnium haeresiam I8.
Plutarch.
De Placitas Philosophorum. Anaxagoras.
Diogenes Laertius. Lives of the Philosophers.
Ibid. 2:13.
Theophrastus. Diogenes Laertius 2:9. Hippolytus.
Refutatio omnium haeresiam.
Fragment 4.
H. DLZ. Die Fragmente der Vorsokratiker, Berlin, 1952. 2:59.
Aristarchus. First of the Greek philosophers and mathematicians to unravel the celestial plan and announce the discovery was Aristarchus of the Isle of Samos. Others before him assumed that the earth is a sphere and that it moves, but he was the first to formulate plainly the heliocentric theory, the scheme which has the sun in the center. Aristarchus lived from about the year 310 before the present era to about 230, and among the geometers he succeeded Euclid and preceded Archimedes. In 288 or 287 BC, he followed Theophrastus as the head of the peripatetic school established by Aristotle. Aristarchus' only extant treatise is on the sizes and distances of the sun and moon. In it he calculated the diameter of the sun is about 7 times the diameter of Earth, thus estimating the sun's volume as about 300 times the volume of the Earth. The actual diameter of the sun is about 300 times the diameter of the Earth. The solar volume is equal to 1,300,000 volumes of the Earth. In this work of Aristarchus there is nothing indicating his heliocentric theory. It was probably this, his realization of the superior mass of the sun, that brought him to his discovery. Or should a celestial body 300 times larger than the earth revolve around it each day? Aristarchus' book on the planetary system, with the sun in the center, did not survive, and we know of it only through references to its content, chiefly by Archimedes. Archimedes, who was 25 years his junior, wrote, Aristarchus brought out a book consisting of certain hypotheses. His hypotheses are that the fixed stars and the sun remain unmoved, and that the earth revolves around the sun in the circumference of a circle, the sun lying in the middle of the orbit. He also added that according to Aristarchus, who is in contradiction to the common account of astronomers, the universe is many times larger than generally assumed by the astronomers, and the fixed stars are at an enormous distance from the sun and its planets. Aristarchus regarded the sun as one of the fixed stars, the closest to the earth. Aristarchus sets the sun among the fixed stars, and holds that the earth moves around the sun's circle, i.e. ecliptic, referred another author centuries later. As Archimedes said, the view of Archimedes conflicted with the common teaching of the astronomers, and he also quoted it only to put it aside disapprovingly. One of the contemporaries of Aristarchus, Cleanthes, wrote a treatise against Aristarchus. Whatever his scientific argument may have been, he accused Aristarchus of the act of impiety. Plutarch, in his book of the face and the disk of the moon, that Cleanthes thought it was the duty of the Greeks to indict Aristarchus of Samos on the charge of impiety for putting in motion the hearth of the universe, this being the effect of his attempt to save the phenomenon by supposing heaven to remain at rest and the earth to revolve in an oblique circle while it rotates at the same time about its own axis. We do not know whether there was any actual court action and verdict. However, we know that a verdict of judges, even if unanimous, could not make the sun a satellite of the earth. Not even a scientific tribunal can do this, not even if it's presided over by Archimedes and the most illustrious men of the generation sit as judges. The spokesman of the scholarly world was Decathlides, who announced that we must assert the earth, the hearth of the house of the gods, according to Plato, to remain fixed and the planets with the whole embraced in heaven, to move and reject the view of those who brought to rest the things which move, and set in motion the things by which their nature and position are unmoved. Such a supposition being contrary to the theories of mathematicians. Aristarchus had no followers in his generation, nor in the next generation. About a century after Aristarchus, Seleucus, a Chaldean of Seleucia on the Tigris, who lived and wrote about the year 150 before the present era, adopted the teaching of Aristarchus. Hipparchus was a contemporary of Seleucus. Hipparchus is thought to be the greatest astronomer of antiquity, and even today there are worshippers of his among the members of the faculty. But he rejected the heliocentric system of Aristarchus, and this he did not on a religious ground, but on a scientific one. A system with the sun in the center, circular orbits, could not account for the peculiarities in the visible motions of the planets. But the theory of epicycles could, and this theory had the earth immobile in the center of the universe. Thus the religious dogma and the mathematical analysis both condemned Aristarchus and his teaching that the earth circles around the sun. Plato. In 399 BC, Socrates was made to drink poison to expiate his crimes by the verdict of an Athenian court. Following his death, Plato, his disciple, then about 28 years old, left Athens for a short sojourn at Megara, followed by a longer stay in Italy and Sicily, Syrus. He also traveled to the Middle East. Only very little is known of this travel. When a boy of about 10, Plato heard the story of Atlantis from his friend and playmate Curtius the Younger, what the latter was told by his grandfather, Curtius the Older, who in his turn had heard it from his friend Solon, who came to Sais in Egypt to learn wisdom and hear the ancient lore. From a very old priest he learned that in the past there had occurred several global catastrophes. In one of them, Atlantis was swallowed by the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. In another, the one which the Greeks associated with Phaethon, there was great conflagration caused by a deviation of the bodies that revolve in heaven around the earth. On his travels, Plato too endeavored to learn wisdom from the wise men of the East. But since the time of Solon's visit in Egypt, that country went through a spiritual debasement, and it is questionable whether anyone of the priestly class there could be counted as a spiritual peer of Ezra or a worthy teacher of Plato in search of wisdom. Later Greek philosophers regarded Plato as influenced by Mosaic teaching. Plato derived his idea of God from the Pentateuch. Plato is Moses, translated into the language of the Athenians, wrote Numenius, and was quoted by Eusebius. If one considers Plato's monotheism, his concept of an invisible and supreme spiritual being, so different from the prevalent polytheism of other Greek philosophers, and so remote from the pantheon of Homer and its scandalous Olympians, with their permanent strife and marital and extramarital affairs with mortal women, one is inclined to think that Plato, at the time of his travel to Egypt, 30 years old, happened to sit at the feet of Ezra. A late Greek tradition has it that Aristotle, on his travel to the lands of the eastern Mediterranean, met a very wise Jew from whom he learned much wisdom. However, it is not known whether Aristotle ever went to Palestine and Egypt. Besides, in Aristotle, a pupil of Plato, one feels a return to polytheistic astral religion. Could it be that the indebtedness of the Greek thought in the days of Plato to the Semitic idea of one and single invisible creator stemmed from Ezra, and knowledgeable man approximating Ezra's stature in the next few generations? All this belongs to the realm of the possible but unproven, and the probable presence of Ezra in Jerusalem after 398 BC, in the days of Artaxerxes II, is of interest for this intriguing problem.